Hey everyone, welcome back to Drowsips. If you like this chill vibe, get comfortable and stay a while. Tonight's story is one of those shifts where you start out ready to help whoever walks in, thinking it'll be another quiet night.
Then a guest steps up with a story about cancer and kids, the kind of thing that cuts through every bit of distance you try to keep. You lean in, you listen, and you believe you're doing the right thing.
But instead of relief, what comes back is anger. This is what it feels like when empathy runs into a wall. And it all begins on the quiet night shift. The quiet night shift looks ordinary at first. The hotel lobby sits still, lit only by the glow of the computer screen and the steady buzz of the lights above. You catch the faint hum of the machine on the desk, the vending machine somewhere down the hall, and not much else. It's the kind of silence that stretches long enough to make you restless, flipping through the same brochures just to pass the time. Nothing urgent, no rush, just that calm where you're half waiting for anything to happen. On nights like these, you settle into a rhythm. Your guard isn't up. You're not juggling 3 impatient guests or trying to fix a billing error while the phone rings nonstop. You're steady, ready, almost in standby mode. That quiet also changes how you think. In forums and staff threads, plenty of hotel workers admit that slow nights make them softer on the rules. One person talks about secretly lowering a rate just to help out a tired family. Another says they'll throw in a surprise upgrade when the lobby is dead quiet. It's not policy, it's human. And in those empty shifts, the urge to be helpful gets stronger.
The difference is small but real. Without the weight of stress, your focus turns to whoever walks through the door next. You're not just waiting for time to pass. You're more tuned in, more open. You can feel that readiness in your posture, the way you sit up just a little straighter when something finally breaks the silence.
And then it happens. The sound of the front door sliding open cuts through the lull. A woman steps inside, and suddenly the room doesn't feel so still anymore. You straighten in your chair. Attention sharpens. She's not just a stranger with a booking. She's someone carrying something with her. Even before she speaks, you watch her approach the counter, aware this isn't routine. You feel that subtle shift from boredom into purpose, the unspoken sense that what happens next will matter more than the usual check-in. She pauses in front of you, not asking about a room right away. Instead, she leans against the desk, her voice low, a little unsteady. And that's when you realize this is going to be different. She begins with a story, not a request. Her words fall slow, edges worn down by exhaustion. She says she needs a place tonight because tomorrow she has to tell her kids their father has cancer. She mentions chemo. She calls them my babies. And then, almost in a whisper, I just need a night to myself before I tell my kids. Doesn't feel like customer talk. It feels like confession. And you catch yourself listening closer. Your own posture shifts without thinking, shoulders dropping, voice softening. You're not running through rates or check-in scripts anymore. You're just there, holding space. The little details land the hardest. Chemo, not just treatment. My babies, not my children. In community threads, plenty of hotel staff say that guests who add weighty, specific details tend to sound more convincing. At the same time, a few commenters warn that too much detail can be a sign of fabrication. People like Hotel Slave 93 and Preventer Wind point out that the more dramatic the phrasing, the more careful staff become about separating sympathy from judgment. Still, in the moment, you don't analyze. It just feels raw and human. So you lean in, your eyes meet hers. You nod slowly, holding the silence. The story pulls you in past the desk, past the policy. It's not about revenue now. It's about imagining what tomorrow looks like for her. The drive home, the faces of young kids, the sting of words that can't be undone once spoken. You feel compelled to help. That's normal.
And several commenters on the thread said they reacted the same way when a guest shared something painful. It's hardwired. When a stranger reveals something vulnerable, you want to lighten their load. Whether it's bending a rule, offering a small break, or just listening longer than required, the instinct is the same. By now, you're fully inside the orbit of her story. The idea of selling a room has faded. You're scanning the mental map of the building, not for price points, but small comforts. Which floor is quietest? Which bed feels softer? Which view might give her even a moment's calm? She's managed to center her need above everything else. Money feels like an afterthought. Comfort is the priority. And in your head, you're already searching for a way to answer that unspoken request, to offer something more than a standard stay. That's when your thoughts start moving past the script, reaching for something beyond policy, something that feels more like care than transaction. Going beyond the call doesn't start with a policy. It starts with a thought. Instead of simply quoting a number, the staffer begins picturing what could make this rough night a little more bearable. A quieter floor, a softer corner, maybe a small grace that isn't required but feels right. It isn't about business anymore. It's about shaping one moment of ease for someone who looks like they need it.
You hear keys clicking as availability pops up on screen, but they're not sorting for the cheapest choice or the default standard room. They're looking with intention. Which door leads to silence instead of hallway noise? Which window opens to the courtyard instead of a row of parked cars? The system will say any empty room is fine. Instinct says find the best one and slip it across without a fuss. This is where frontline work changes. Policy is fixed. Inventory is fixed. What isn't fixed is how much heart you're willing to bring into the small details. In staff threads, plenty of hotel workers share moments when they've broken monotony with a quiet upgrade. Like one commenter, Uncaring Nonchalance, who described making a plan to surprise a family with a larger room just because it felt good to hand over a better key. That's the logic here. An invisible cost traded for a visible gesture. Quiet authority used in the smallest way possible. And that smallness is what makes it matter. There's also an inner negotiation happening. The screen shows a dozen empty rooms. It's a slow week. Nobody's fighting over inventory, and one nicer unit sitting unused won't hurt the bottom line. So why not? It becomes less about rules and more about choice, about deciding that this night doesn't have to feel routine, that maybe giving comfort to a stranger is a way to stay human when the job feels mechanical. It doesn't need to be grand. A quieter wing. A room that smells a little fresher. A desk by the window where she can sit with her thoughts before the hardest conversation she'll ever have. It feels small, but small counts. And more than that, it carries weight for you as the staffer. Readers on those threads often note that carving out these tiny exceptions provides a sense of purpose. It's not about being thanked. It's about breaking the repetition and reminding yourself this work involves people, not just reservations. So the plan forms. You'll reduce the cost a little. You'll tuck the upgrade into the deal without flagging it as special. You'll deliver comfort the way a gift is meant to be given, quietly, and for a moment it feels right. This night won't be a transaction. It will be a gesture. A pause worth offering. So the staffer finally speaks the first number. It's already cut down, lower than the rack rate, and it's offered gently, almost like they're handing over a kindness. But the guest doesn't relax. She stiffens instead. Her eyes narrow ever so slightly, and where there was vulnerability a moment ago, now there's calculation. No smile, no thanks, just silence, sharp and heavy, as if she's weighing it against something else in her mind. When the first number is spoken, people in the thread say it often becomes the yardstick for everything that follows. High or low doesn't matter as much as what it sets in motion. Once that figure is out there, it frames the conversation. And with her, you can feel the judgment instantly. It's not measured against the comfort she asked for earlier. It's measured against an idea in her head of what a room that night should cost. You see the shift written across her body. Her arms might cross. Her jaw tightens. That warmth the staffer thought they had is gone. What comes next is the blunt line pulled directly from the thread. Almost $200? Are you fucking kidding me? Let the words ring for a moment, the way they must have in that room. The softness they shared seconds earlier is replaced by raw disbelief. And here's where it stings. That was already the reduced number.
Plenty of people in the comments chimed in after, saying it's common for a guest to reject the first offer flat out. Not always because it's unfair, but because it opens the door for more. Push back once and maybe you get a sweeter deal. In their view, it's a tactic. But the staffer isn't thinking about strategies in the heat of the moment. They're thinking about the moment collapsing. The mindset shifts. What was meant to be a surprise, a free upgrade, a quiet gift, no longer feels optional. Now it feels like patchwork, like something necessary to salvage the mood. Instead of a gesture, it becomes damage control. And here's the divide that can't be bridged by the rate alone. For her, value is measured in dollars shaved off the bottom line. For the staffer, value was tied to care, to offering a place of rest on a night carrying too much weight. Two ideas of worth colliding over a single number. That split sets up what happens next. The staffer takes a breath, steadies their tone, and signals that maybe there's still something more to give.
So the staffer leans forward, voice still calm, and says, "Let me just see what we have available." That choice of words is deliberate. Not, "This is the price," but, "Let me see." It carries the promise of digging into options you're not supposed to see, like pulling back a curtain. For most guests, those words feel like someone just joined your side.
Sometimes they'll add in a softer touch.
"Maybe we've got a suite open," or "Let me check if something with a better view came up today." Paired with a small smile, it's meant to signal care. The staffer thinks they're building a bridge back to connection, closing the gap that opened when the number landed. But across the desk, the signal reads different. To the guest, it looks less like generosity and more like proof that the first rate was never final.
Staff in comment threads often point out that saying, "I'll see what I can do," frames the effort as personal. They know it boosts how valuable the gesture feels, like when a server says they ran to the kitchen just for you. But some also warn that it can backfire. In this thread, a few voices stressed that they stick to policy no matter what. One even said flat out, "I will never, ever give better rates." And there's a reason for that. If every adjustment is treated as a hidden extra, you risk training guests to push harder, waiting for the next concession. For the staffer though, this isn't about strategy. It's about making the night survivable for her and for them. That's what makes the plan to upgrade sound almost tender in tone. A suite, a quiet corner, maybe the kind of view someone remembers for months. They're ready to hand over the best they can without risking the job. A gift wrapped in silence, not flagged as special, but still carrying weight. Free upgrades usually win people over. They can turn an average stay into a story someone tells fondly years later. But only if the guest cares about the upgrade at all. If someone is locked on numbers, then an open suite is just fancy wallpaper when all they wanted was a cheaper key. What should feel like generosity is about to become something very different. The offer is ready, the plan in place. But the moment it leaves the staffer's lips, the reaction waiting across the counter will be nothing like gratitude. The reaction hits like a crack through the lobby. The offer is barely out before she fires back, her voice sharp enough to cut the quiet. "Are you fucking kidding me?" The words hang there, echoing harder than they should in the stillness, and you can almost hear the spike in energy as the room shifts from soft to hostile. There's no hint of gratitude. Her expression hardens, her gaze turns icy, and the warmth of her earlier story disappears like it was never there.
What comes next isn't a counteroffer, not a negotiation. It's an accusation. She lashes back that the staffer must have thought they could take advantage of her, that playing vulnerable makes them a target. The way she frames it, her story was twisted for profit. Many commenters looking at this exchange read that sudden aggression as a tell. They say when someone leads with emotion and it fails to deliver the result they wanted, the mask often slips. The sad story collapses and out comes anger. You can hear that shift in the air. What felt like grief moments ago now sounds like manipulation dressed up in rage. The staffer, caught in the blast, reacts the way many frontline workers describe in thread replies. Their face tightens, shoulders come up, the trace of kindness drains away. That instinctive lean forward flips into leaning back. One commenter shared that being cursed out like this left them quietly shaken for hours. Another admitted they carried the stress home, unable to let go even after their shift was done. Words don't just sting in that instant. They echo long past closing time. And in that echo, the true shape of the interaction sets in. The story wasn't shared for connection. It was offered as currency, a trade for pity. When that trade didn't pay out, the script flipped. Her outrage wasn't really about rooms or rates. It was about the game not going her way. She expected sorrow to translate into a discount. What she got instead was generosity in the wrong form. That's why the fight sharpens here. The illusion of need has broken, and what steps forward is something colder. As you listen, you'll see the focus shift completely. She's no longer talking about hardship at all, only about cost, and why this night suddenly looks like a terrible deal. And then she does something sharper. She reframes the whole moment into a comparison. Not about her story anymore, not about needing space for a hard night. She fixes her eyes on the staffer and with absolute disbelief says slowly, "I could take my kids on vacation for that much." That single comparison changes everything. She's no longer weighing a hotel stay against another hotel. She's weighing it against the memory of a trip with her children, against joy, escape, play. In an instant, the value of the room collapses. The quiet corner suite doesn't look like relief. It looks like a squandered opportunity. That's not an accident. Commenters on the thread also pointed out that shifting the comparisons, framing a night's stay as a family vacation, shrinks a hotel's perceived value. It's a move that takes the staffer's offer and makes it feel absurd. Now the staffer is stuck. Their mind was on comfort, on trying to provide something restful. Suddenly it's being matched against vacations, beach trips, things no single night in a hotel could ever compete with. The context flips, and what was meant as a kindness now looks inflated, even greedy. For her, the room is nothing more than a number on paper. For the agent, it was a chance to give someone a sanctuary. That gap, that break in how each side sees the worth, is what collapses the exchange. And here's the deeper cut. Perceived value has almost nothing to do with cost. A bottle of water on your kitchen counter feels worthless. Hand that same bottle to someone in the desert and it might feel priceless. A quiet suite on the eve of heartbreaking news could mean everything if she wanted it to. But because she didn't, because she spun it into a wasted vacation, the room was rendered worthless in her eyes. That's what exposes the real goal. Sleep wasn't the priority. Comfort wasn't the priority. Her priority was securing a cheaper rate. The story about cancer and kids, the tug at empathy, it wasn't for connection. It was a tactic. When it failed, she didn't pivot to gratitude. She pivoted to devaluing the whole thing, making the space itself seem pointless. So the staffer stands there absorbing the shift. What was built on care has dissolved into bargaining. And right when the conversation feels like it might drop quiet, she adds one more parting shot. Proof that the exit won't be a silent one. She doesn't just leave, she leaves a mark. As she heads for the door, the last word slips out low, trailing behind her, but sharp enough to sting. Fucking ridiculous. It's not shouted, not even directed fully at the staffer. It's tossed into the air like trash on her way out, a deliberate insult meant to linger after she's gone.
The door closes behind her with a dull thud. The lobby falls quiet again, but it's not the same kind of quiet from before. This silence is heavier, thick with the echo of everything that just happened. The staffer stands motionless, staring into that space where the encounter collapsed. A moment ago, they had leaned into empathy. Now they're left holding nothing but a muttered insult.
Commenters in the thread repeatedly say how a bad ending like that doesn't banish when the guest does. It sits with you. It clings to the air, replaying itself long after the shift ends. Service work has its ups and downs, but it's always the sharp, bitter exits you remember most. They outweigh the brief bits of kindness, because contempt burns deeper than gratitude soothes. Behind the desk, the reminders of what could have been are still there. The monitor glows with the unbooked upgrade, still listed as available. The gesture is right in front of them, but useless now. It feels like a ghost of effort, proof of good intent that went nowhere. And that's part of the weight. You don't just feel insulted, you feel wasted. The shift moves on, but the mood doesn't. One person in the thread said it's like trying to reset a video game after losing to a boss. You can reload, you can keep playing, but the sting of that failure sticks in your fingers. That's what makes customer contempt so draining. It turns the job into something harder to step out of, even hours later. The staffer stays there alone with the loop turning over in their head. Fucking ridiculous. Over and over. It wasn't about policy or price anymore. It was about kindness being dragged into the dirt. The story, the plea, the talk of children. It all crumbled into a tactic. When the tactic didn't work, the mask dropped, and the target got cursed out for daring to hold the line.
You can almost hear the moral cement itself right there in the empty lobby. This wasn't vulnerability. This was a transaction dressed in tragedy. And when it failed, the exit was nothing but contempt. Let's see how the thread reacted. The post doesn't sit in silence for long. Once it goes up online, the thread answers back almost instantly with a kind of collective verdict. And instead of paraphrasing every small reply, it's the top comments that really frame the reaction. The highest voted voice comes from Fuzzle Fox, who doesn't dress it up at all. Wow, sounds like a grade A scammer. That blunt line lands like a stamp across the story. It sets the tone for how the whole community is viewing what happened, not as an emotional misunderstanding, but as someone running an old, familiar play. Right beneath that, you get a different texture. A user named Uncaring Nonchalance writes that they hoped she at least got a quiet moment during her stay, just in case part of her story was true. That one comment pulls back from pure outrage and offers a sliver of empathy, a reminder that even in threads full of anger, people still wrestle with the tiny chance that pain was real. Then another highly supported reply goes straight to the staffer themselves. You're a very kind person. Short, simple. It doesn't analyze tactics or break down behavior. It turns the spotlight back on the worker, naming their effort out loud. That's validation in its purest form. You can imagine the difference it makes for someone reading this after being cursed out in the lobby. Suddenly, they're not alone. They're backed by a crowd who sees and affirms their kindness. And that's the rhythm the top comments set. Direct outrage with the scam label. Quiet empathy for the slim chance of truth. And then reassurance aimed squarely at the staffer. Reading those back to back gives you the whole range. Anger at manipulation, recognition of humanity, and validation that the worker's instincts weren't foolish. The community doesn't belabor the point with dozens of repeats. They let 3 or 4 strong voices carry the weight. From there, the logic of the thread gets sharper. Commenters sketch out the pattern they've seen again and again.
lead with an emotional story, zero in on sympathy, pivot to aggression when the discount isn't handed over. Some mention different versions: dead relatives, job loss, cars breaking down. The details change, but the structure doesn't. What felt like a haunting one-off in the lobby, they tag as a routine scam. Not random, not personal, just a script. For the staffer, that shift in framing matters. Alone at the desk, it felt like betrayal. Online, it's reframed as a tactic others have endured. That kind of collective naming isn't just venting. It's how forums build what feels like a survival manual. Warnings, examples, verdicts. A shared immune system against manipulation. And yet, amid all that validation, another current emerges across the thread. A reminder that this is why policies exist and why some staff choose to never deviate. That's where the next layer of discussion goes. One of the strongest themes that rises up in the thread is something staff call the policy protection principle. It's less about rules on a page and more about survival at the desk. When the stories turn manipulative, workers describe policy as not just company procedure, but as armor. A way to stay steady when emotion is being used like a tool. One of the clearest lines captures it best. A commenter writes, "I stick to policy and turn emotions off. At first, it comes off cold, but read again, it's not cruelty. It's self-defense. It's the difference between walking out of a shift drained and walking out with a little energy left." In their words, following policy isn't about being unkind. It's about closing a door against being pulled in too deep. Many hotel workers in the thread explicitly called policy a shield, a way to protect themselves from burnout and manipulation. When you don't use it, they said, every request feels like a trap you have to solve. Every interaction turns into open-ended negotiation, but policy draws the line. This far, no further. It lets staff hold on to a calm professionalism without being tricked into overgiving. Several voices in the replies took it a step further, pointing out a hard truth. A hotel room isn't therapy on demand, and a front desk agent isn't a social worker. When someone is truly in crisis, handing them a discount isn't what keeps them safe. One person even said bluntly, if it's that serious, the right action is to call emergency or social services, not eat the nightly rate. That advice stings because it's clear. Your job is hospitality, not crisis intervention. Lose those boundaries, and you're not protecting anyone, least of all yourself. The thread is dotted with reminders like that. Not heartless, not cynical, just sober. If you drain yourself dry for every guest who tells a story, you won't have anything left for the ones who walk in respectful, who appreciate ordinary kindness without twisting it. Commenters stress this point over and over. Holding to policy isn't about closing yourself off from empathy. It's about choosing where that empathy lands so you can still care in the right places. And that's the real weight behind this principle. Policies don't just protect the business, they protect the worker's humanity. They're the guardrail that lets you still be decent without being used. They let you hold a line and walk out of the shift whole. But once you understand that frame, you see why the next phrase, short and brutal as it is, hits the workers so much harder. A phrase that kept popping up in the thread was, "No good deed goes unpunished." Short, blunt, and familiar. But here, surrounded by stories of frustration, it read less like a cliché and more like a quiet verdict. It summed up exactly what the staffer felt in that lobby, the sting of trying to offer something kind and getting hostility in return. Not just rejection, but backlash. The more you scroll through, the more you see it repeated. Different commenters drop it in almost like a refrain, as though they all recognize the same pattern. And right after typing the phrase, many add their own personal proof. One short post tells of buying a meal for someone who asked for help, only to be yelled at because no drink was included. Another story. A worker helped cover for a coworker, who later flipped the blame back on them when a mistake showed up. both tiny in scale but both cutting for the same reason. The effort to be decent was rewarded with something cold. Some commenters connected those repeated moments to a kind of learned caution. Not clinical, just lived experience. That sense you get after too many bad outcomes that maybe helping isn't worth it. You weren't born guarded, but you start to protect your energy because part of you has learned the hard way that generosity can backfire. And once you've been burned enough, extending yourself feels riskier each time. Reading through those posts feels like watching people pass around the same scar, pointing at it so you know you're not alone. It's not just venting. It's a form of group therapy, where dozens of small examples stitch into one lesson that trying to step outside policy, outside the standard script, can leave you exposed to people eager to twist it against you. But in the same breath, something else shows up too, a note of solidarity. The community isn't telling staff to stop caring entirely. What they're saying is that kindness without guardrails doesn't always earn appreciation. In this line of work, it often attracts the opposite. To them, the phrase isn't an excuse to harden up forever. It's a reminder to stay alert, to keep your boundaries intact, so you can still choose where to put your care. And that sets up the next turn in the discussion, because once the idea of controlled kindness takes root, the thread shifts focus. It moves to a scenario where the stakes are high and the needs are real, but the encounters can still be some of the hardest for staff to handle. In the middle of all this, another thread theme surfaces. Something people called the Make-A-Wish paradox. Some workers reported that the toughest guests they ever faced weren't the usual scammers or drunks, but parents attached to Make-A-Wish trips. That kind of admission lands heavy. You'd expect those families to be gentle, grateful. Most are, but some workers said the opposite. When the stakes are highest, the demands can be relentless. One commenter even laid it out straight. Some of the worst guests I've dealt with were Make-A-Wish parents. Read that one aloud as is, because it captures the shock in just a few words. The stories that followed painted vivid scenes. Parents pushing for room upgrades beyond what was secured, asking for free meals, insisting on late checkouts. Not framed as questions, but pressure. Nights that feel like, our situation is so tragic, the rules shouldn't apply to us. That sense of entitlement wears down staff fast. But here's the balance, and the thread made it clear not to forget it. Many families are kind, grateful, heartbreakingly sweet in the way they say thank you for small things. To keep things fair, one of the higher voted replies countered the harsh takes directly. Not all families are like that. Most are lovely. It's just the pushy ones that leave the mark. And that's an important line to hear out loud. Otherwise, the story tips into broad strokes, and reality is always mixed. Still, the demanding moments stand out in memory. A parent furious that the room didn't have a balcony. Another who dismissed the gift basket because the wrong brand of snacks was inside. Those are the examples staff remember when they sit back at the desk, drained. And when you stack them beside the warm, grateful interactions, you see the paradox at full weight. Tragedy doesn't guarantee grace. Sometimes it sharpens entitlement. The tension these workers describe is real. You want to be compassionate. You know what that family is carrying. At the same time, you're not a charity. You can't fund a trip. You can't erase grief. You can only extend what the role allows. A gesture, a discount, a quiet upgrade. Beyond that, you hit limits. And when those limits are tested over and over again, you start to feel it in your bones. Even the most sympathetic stories still need boundaries because compassion fatigue is real. That's a line straight from the thread. Workers said you have to protect your own energy or else the job strips you of it one request at a time. Care too much without guardrails and you stop being able to care at all. So the paradox leaves you with a clear reminder.
Kindness has to be handled with structure. And that leads naturally to the next question. What do you actually say when someone pushes past your limits? The art of the soft no is one of those skills the community kept circling back to. It's not about slamming a door shut with a hard refusal, but about stepping sideways, keeping the boundary while sounding calm, even human. Staff in the thread said this is where policy becomes your shield. One comment spelled it out in 6 words. I stick to policy and turn emotions off. That isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation.
A phrase that shows up again and again is, my system won't allow that. It moves the blame away from you as a person and puts it on the faceless program glowing behind the desk. Another variation is, company policy doesn't allow that. Both lines do the same work. They pull you out from being the villain in the story. The refusal becomes structural, not personal. And that subtle redirect can keep the air neutral instead of turning hostile. Of course, no doesn't have to be the last word. A big part of the soft no is pivoting to smaller offers. Many staff talked about using little gestures, a modest discount on the rate, a late checkout, or even a complimentary bottle of water. None of these erase the denial, but they soften the edges. They signal that you've listened, and you're still trying within your range of control. Commenters said guests often respond more calmly when they feel the staff is putting in effort, even if the outcome isn't what they first asked for. These aren't grand concessions. They're symbolic gestures. But in a world where most requests slam against policies, something small can feel like acknowledgement. That 5% discount doesn't matter to the hotel's books, but to a tired guest, it can be the difference between leaving annoyed and leaving neutral. And for you as the worker, it's a way to end the moment with dignity intact, like tossing a token toward goodwill without handing over the whole store.
The language matters too. We aren't able to make exceptions takes some of the pressure off you. It suggests the rule is bigger than both of you, that this line won't move no matter how much weight is pushed against it. And as several commenters pointed out, it's easier for a guest to be angry at the idea of them, the company, the system, the brand, than to keep directing that anger at the one person standing in front of them.
The point isn't to win. You're not there to outmaneuver guests like you're debating in a courtroom. You're there to end the interaction cleanly, to keep it from escalating into shouting, insults, or the kind of bitterness that sinks deep into your shift. The soft no gives you an exit ramp, a way to walk away with your energy preserved, ready for the next person who comes through the door. Or as one narrator line might put it, the goal is to protect your energy so you can still help the people who deserve it. It's a practical lesson, repeated so many times that it turns into rhythm. Policy as shield. Small symbolic gestures as olive branches. Boundaries held without burning yourself out. And once you understand that rhythm, you're ready to see how it feels when the night finally gets quiet again, and all that's left is the weight of it sitting with you. So the lobby falls back into stillness. The desk light hums, the computer screen glows, and the hours stretch on. But the silence isn't the same as before. It feels tempered, weighted. The worker is still there in their chair, but they're not the same person who began the shift. Something in them has steadied. They still carry the urge to help, but it has shifted shape. It's no longer the open, blind eagerness that sat them forward earlier in the night. Now it's a slower, boundary-minded kind of care. What began as a naive helper ready to bend rules has settled into a professional who knows kindness needs a frame. That change is subtle but permanent. The next time someone walks up to the counter with an emotional story, they'll listen differently. They'll still hear the sorrow in the words, but alongside it, they'll notice the edges, the extra details that don't quite fit, the way the tone flips too quickly between sadness and demand, the practiced little turns that signal a tactic. Bad encounters linger longer than good ones, and those lessons quietly rewire how you move in the world.
On the desk, the monitor still shows the room that could have been, an open upgrade with a softer view, still unbooked. It just sits there, the outline of an offer that never landed. A ghost of generosity turned into ammunition. Back at the desk, the staffer has crossed into a new mode of working life. Not without empathy, but with boundaries drawn around it. They've learned that stories aren't always signals of need. Some are signals of negotiation, dressed to look like pain. That's not a loss of kindness, but a revision of it, a way to keep empathy alive without letting it drain you dry. The lesson cost them peace for a night, but it gave something hard-earned in return, an inner balance. The power to offer care without being pulled under, to give small gestures without being emptied by them. That knowledge weighs heavy at first, but it's the kind of weight you can actually stand on. The suit of rules and boundaries may not feel warm, but it's what allows warmth to survive inside you. Because keeping empathy sustainable means knowing how to shelter it. The story closes here. The sweet, the silence, the lesson, they all fold back into the lobby night. This story is over, and what that leaves us with is a larger truth, one that sits beyond this single encounter. The line between staying open and staying safe is narrow, but necessary. Boundaries protect your ability to keep caring, and that was the reminder pulsing through the thread. As many commenters said, holding the line doesn't make you cold. It makes you durable. It allows you to give genuine kindness without burning out, to keep yourself steady for the moments that truly deserve it. If this helped you unwind, subscribe for more calm story time paired with cozy game worlds. Thanks for being here. You did the right thing by listening. Get some sleep.